All right, we are live.
Bingo.
Good morning, Dr. Mike.
Well, it's good afternoon. It's 4:08
Yeah,
here in good old New York City.
6 a.m. here in Sydney. So, I made a point. I got up a little bit earlier this time than last week because the start to our first go at this, I was still half asleep. So I've got my coffee here. I'm up a bit earlier. I'm ready to rock.
It's a beautiful thing. Getting up early and fixes a lot of issues, doesn't it?
It actually does. And that's been one thing that I think I've let go anyway during this whole sort of lockdown thing is I've become pretty lazy with my routine. And instead of getting up at 5 o'clock and just getting into the day now, I'm sort of sleeping in a bit more. So
Yeah, and your like energy for the day kind of just bleeds and prolongs too. So it's like when you were tired at 10 p.m., like what did you do all day to actually be tired by 10 p.m. now? So you're staying up till 11. You can't, you're not going to get up at 5 o'clock if you're going to staying up till 11. You're on your phone, all this other stuff. It's easy to get out of the swing of things in an environment like this.
it takes a lot of energy watching Netflix all day. Come on.
It's tough, man. You get involved in Tiger King, and next thing you know, you got heart palpitations. Your calorie burn goes up, and basically get a workout in. Thinking about Carol Baskin.
That shit was like watching Jerry Springer play out live. It was unbelievable.
It's like, I mean, I don't know how many individuals like that you have in Australia. Maybe it's a lot. I don't know. I'm not familiar. I've only seen the Hugh Jackman movie. But there's a surprising amount of those individuals in the state. Not so much in New York where I'm from, but, you start going into other locations. Oklahoma is that. Maybe they're not, a homosexual polygamist that has a zoo, but there's some real interesting characters. Like go into a Walmart. Do you guys have Walmart in Australia?
Not specifically, no, but
You're lucky. So those of you listening from the States, all four of you, hi Mom, walk into a Walmart and then tell me how surprised you are that Tiger King exists, and you won't be that surprised.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing there was a Facebook page. It's probably still floating around. It was called The People of Walmart or something like that.
Dude.
Yeah, there's some special people on there.
There was a new post where it was like people of Walmart and the protective gear that they were using. It was crazy, crazy stuff. Like somebody had like a plague mask. I'm like, how did you get a mask from the freaking bubonic plague?
I think I saw one dude with a water cooler on his head.
Very, very protective. Will filter out all the particles of coronavirus.
Yeah, well, look, I can definitely get some better Australian movies for you, and that might give you more of a flavour of our reality. So I'm not sure that Hugh Jackman movie is the best representation.
It was Hugh Jackman, Nicole Kidman, right? Was Nicole Kidman in it? It was like, we don't have a budget. It was like, we don't have a budget, so we're just going to get two Aussies to do this stuff.
Yeah, I don't think that was a movie that did particularly well. So I'm sure we can do better for you.
I'm looking forward to all recommendations.
So what's been happening this week? Anything going down in lockdown?
Oh, not really. I mean, I'm trying to just put together as much information and content as possible. I put a little 12-week shoulder program up on a website called Gumroad. So who knows if that'll get any hits. It's a really, really good program. I just don't know what people's disposable income is like right now. Maybe the stimulus check here in the States will enable somebody to spend $30 on a 12-week program that will fix their shoulder pain. I think it's worth it, but I'm biased.
Oh, look, back in the day, I bought the Bulletproof Shoulders program off the Active Life guys, and we're talking probably 5 years ago now. But man, it was fantastic. Just lots of overhead carries and heavy farmers carries, and yeah, I guess a lot of the stuff that gets neglected from training. But it was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's, CrossFit likes to claim they are constantly varied. They're constantly varied within a very limited framework. So the pool of movements that are actually used in a traditional CrossFit gym setting or CrossFit.com is very, very limited, right? There's a lot of overhead work, a lot of dynamic overhead work in the form of push presses and jerks. There's a lot of pull-up work. There's not a lot of unilateral stuff. It's actually changed quite a bit in the past 3 or 4 years, which I'm thankful for. But I essentially work. I didn't essentially. I work for Active Life. That was my first job out here in New York. And what they came to the conclusion of, what we came to the conclusion of is, 80% of people need the same 80% of movements to get 80% of their pain to go away. We design programs like that. They design programs like that. I took what I learned through them, essentially built my own 12-week and kind of did the graphic design work myself, put it together, and give it a gander if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'd love to have a look. I mean, it's the sort of thing that people have got time for now, because you generally just need a dumbbell or a kettlebell or something.
Yeah, I think the equipment that I have in the program is a kettlebell or dumbbell, maybe a barbell if you really, really want to do things verbatim. And then I think I have like a 1-arm ring row program somewhere in there. So if you got like a set of $15 rings from, I don't know,
Nice.
Dick's Sporting Goods or whatever the equivalent is. But yeah, I'll send it to you for free.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
You get an influencer discount.
Wow. That escalated quickly.
Yeah. As long as you post a picture of it with like no shirt on.
Oh yeah. Of course.
And then the next post has to be an advertisement for like booty tea or something like that.
Dude, we might lose the 4 followers that we've got. Yeah. Our mums are going to drop off.
We might gain 2 more though. A net negative of 2.
Yeah, we have in our country, we now have a major shortage of workout equipment. So pretty much anything that was available to be bought online is gone. Yesterday, I just saw a friend of mine, a friend of his has kind of pivoted his business he's now creating dumbbells that are made out of concrete. So he's essentially making the dumbbell with a metal handle in the middle, but with concrete on the ends of it. And yeah, so he's making a whole spectrum of it. And it's reasonably cheap, I guess, because you can knock that out pretty easily. So people are trying to innovate a little bit. And the stuff, if you've got stuff to sell, mate, it's not lasting, it's going quick. So anything is just flying out.
Yeah, by the time I put a purchase in, all the kettlebells from Rogue Fitness were gone. All the dumbbells from Rogue Fitness were gone.
Yeah.
They actually still had what they call those Thompson fat bells. Have you ever seen those? Where it's like the handle's in the middle of the bell and it's like a sphere around it. You look like Mega Man. So I ended up buying 2 of those, and they've done me they've served quite a purpose. I also bought a sandbag, but I can't find dry sand anywhere. I mean, I could walk to the beach over here or the bay.
Oh, right. Yeah, because they don't sell it with sand in it, right? You fill it.
Well, the sand is like ridiculously expensive to ship when it's like, okay, you can get a $5 thing of 50-pound play sand from Home Depot, but I'm scared to go to Home Depot.
It's going to dig up your garden.
Yeah. You don't know how many filthy germs are in there.
True. Yeah, the air bikes has been the other thing that's a really hot commodity. Everyone wants one of those. So they disappeared very quickly, and there was a few assault bikes left online, and then all of a sudden the price just doubled. So yeah, that kind of sucks, but man, they still got sold. So
supply and demand, my friend. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, so there's going to be some pretty sweet home gyms lying around when all of this dies off.
Oh my gosh. And if you're Rogue Fitness or you're Titan Fitness or Rep Fitness, you're loving it. You're absolutely adoring what's happening right now, because you can't keep things on the shelf. As fast as you can produce them, those dumbbells will go. I mean, I don't know how many barbells you're selling particularly, but I know that the bumper plates, like you can't find any bumper plates right now at Rogue Fitness. My friend was so funny. This is the most American thing you'll ever hear. He's like, yeah, I went to Rogue Fitness and none of the plates were in stock. And then I went to click on one in kilograms and they were still there. So I bought them all up. Like, hey, do some math and then buy your plates
and
you'll
you're all
be
good.
okay. You'd rather be
Yeah.
weak than do math.
There's actually some businesses that are, you know, really thriving with all of this. It just, I think it depends where your, you know, where your niche lies. But I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who works in the timber industry, timber and hardware, and they're doing great because everyone is at home and they're actually using the time to renovate their homes. So they're painting and they're doing, you know, smaller in-home renovations. And I think the building industry is in general is still going pretty well. So he's absolutely loving it because, you know, his office is quietened down. So he's got a bit more time to himself and the business is thriving. So, you know, I think there's, unfortunately in our space, it's not really an industry that's doing well right now, but there's some others that are killing it.
Yeah, everybody has their time. Everybody has their heyday. When this is all said and done and things recover a little bit, I would be absolutely astonished if both of our businesses were not doing extremely well, because, you know, the crux of this is, you know, if you are unhealthy, you are more vulnerable to serious effects of this virus.
Right.
So now you look at health as from a metabolic standpoint, you look at from a functional standpoint, you look at from a psychological standpoint. It's like, okay, what do you and I do very, very well? You and I fix people's joint pain. Now, what does fixing people's joint pain do? It allows them to get into the gym. Allowing them to get in the gym allows them to get in better shape. If you're working out in the gym, you're more likely to be watching your nutrition. If you're working out in the gym, you're more likely to have positive headspace, less structural deficiencies, and everybody should be 100% focused on their health after this, because all it takes is somebody eating a anaconda or something somewhere before the next thing, you know what I mean? Before the next thing comes. So it's like the only thing that can't be taken from, no, that's not true. If you want to prevent yourself from experiencing the effects of a situation like this, which probably as the world globalizes more is going to become more and more frequent, you got to be healthy. And there's certain stipulations that you have to respect in order to be healthy. And there's certain principles and laws that you have to respect in order to be healthy. And that kind of brings us,
I like what you did there.
Topic of conversation today. What a transition, right?
Yeah, that was a beautiful segue.
It was amazing. Just pat myself on the back there. But right, there are principles that you have to respect, and in musculoskeletal healthcare and healthcare in general, right, one of the most important principle that you have to respect is load versus capacity. So do you want to kind of expound on that?
Yeah, so I think what you touched on is really nice with first principles as a concept, because it's really where everyone needs to start from to start that journey towards finding out the truth. And so if you diving into that journey not at the start, but you're coming in at a midpoint, let's say, you know, in musculoskeletal care, if you sort of dive in at the treatment level, for instance, and kind of forget about everything at the start. So there's a lot less of the respect for what's going on with that person, what's actually going on, and there's a lot less investigation, and there's a lot less diagnosis happening. They're kind of missing out on potentially getting the right treatment. So it's really about starting at the start, paying attention to everything that matters, and then arriving at the right place as you move through it. So in the integrative diagnosis system, we've got 7 first principles, and they're in order. And the first one that you mentioned is load versus capacity. And so the way that this is kind of explained is that the load versus capacity, it basically explains 100% of musculoskeletal injuries. And an injury occurs when the load has exceeded the capacity. And so that capacity can be a body as a whole, or a regional area of a body, or a very specific tissue within the body. And that's where we usually see that person coming into the office, because they've got symptoms. They've got pain, there's something going on, and a load has exceeded capacity somewhere in their system. So it's a very simple way to explain things to people, and I really like to use a very simple diagram. I'm not sure if we call it a seesaw. I think you guys call it a teeter-totter or something. Is that right?
I think depends on where you're at in the country.
Did I get that?
Seesaw or teeter-totter works.
So like, it's what you'd expect to see in a child's playground. You know, you've got a fulcrum in the middle and a beam across the top and a weight on each end, and it's like a balancing act, right? So if we have load at one end and capacity at the other end, we generally want to see the capacity overcoming the load. But there's an interplay between those in life and in sport and in everything. And so as that load starts to overcome the capacity, that's when we start to see people starting to have problems. So it's a very simple representation of what we deal with, but it really, when you break it down to that level, it really explains everything.
Yeah, and you know, I would even go so far as to say that it's not just, you know, musculoskeletal healthcare. I think it's universal throughout all healthcare, right? I mean, listen, you know, you go and you take you urinate. Excuse me, I was gonna say a naughty word, and it burns. Right? What has happened is that your bladder and your urethra, your lower urinary tract, its capacity has been exceeded in the amount of bacterial or viral or parasitic load that it is capable of grunting, right? That's load versus capacity. Cancer, your body's ability to process and kill cancer cells, which are, you know, existing in you and I right now as we speak, the load of that gets exceeded. The load of it exceeds the capacity. You look at diabetes, your ability to clear glucose from your bloodstream, it exceeds your body's ability to do that, and all of a sudden you have diabetes. And most therapeutic modalities are aimed at inserting themselves in that dysfunctional relationship between load versus capacity, whether it's breaking down adhesion to improve you know, flexibility and decrease the load in a joint, whether it's to prescribe a patient metformin and decrease the load, you know, in your body's own ability to process that. There's cancer drugs, there's antibiotics, there's things that manage your blood pressure, there's many things. So it's this universal it's this universal concept that you just can't escape, and you have to accept it. Otherwise, your ability to be a healthcare provider is going to suffer. And the interesting thing is, and you brought this up very, very nicely when explaining the teeter-totter, is you sometimes in certain systems want the load to approach the capacity in order to then cause an adaptation to improve your capacity, right? It's like what lifting weights is. You're going to do a biceps curl so much to where that load almost exceeds the capacity, causes pain. Your body thinks, I don't want that to happen again. What am I going to do? I'm going to increase the size of my muscle tissue. Your immune system works the same way, right? You know, that's what a flu shot does, is it increases the load within your body of an influenza virus, such that your body adapts. And, you know, depending on how sick you are when you get that flu shot, sometimes you feel like garbage, sometimes you're just like slow for a day, but you get that to approach that capacity. And then approaching that capacity, your body adapts and it improves.
Yeah, and, you know, you can extrapolate this out into so many different scenarios. So you could have acute injuries, for instance, where, let's say someone rolls an ankle. So it's like a lateral ankle sprain, a very, very quick thing that happens. And so the load in doing that is exceeded the capacity of those ligaments just very quickly. There's a very quick stretch that happens. And then on the other end of that, we can have a very long, drawn out, almost like a repetitive micro trauma sort of load exceeding capacity. And that's something that you see more inside the gym. someone that's got a lot of reps under their belt doing pull-ups over the course of a month, and then something starts to break down. So you can kind of apply this in so many different scenarios, inside the gym, but then you can take it outside of there as well, as you said. So it's quite a universal principle, and I think it's a really beautiful way to help someone to understand how something has come about.
Yeah, I mean, it's life.
Yeah,
it's literally life. Like, I think that your load exceeds your capacity enough, you die, right? You get shot, which is an acute spike in the load within your system, and then if it exceeds the capacity of your heart, your lungs, your vital organs, you're dead, right? I mean, and your body from the moment you are born is trying to prevent that from happening, and is trying to manage your load versus capacity. So if your whole body is doing it, why isn't your biceps doing it? Why isn't your soleus doing it? Why it's just, it's one, like water is wet. You just have to accept it.
Yeah.
And once you accept it, your world completely flipping changes. As a healthcare provider, it changes as a patient. You understand what's going on more and more and more. You're actually a part and active in your care plan, because you can think, is what I'm about to do going to cause too much load to exceed my capacity relative to where it's at right now?
Right. And then, in the clinical setting, it kind of drives everything that happens there, because everything has to be about either decreasing load and or increasing capacity, and getting that interplay right. So, everything works in tandem there. So whether it's on the patient to actually decrease their load in their activities that they do, or whether it's the treatment that we do that needs to decrease the load as well as increasing capacity, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and you and I will look at a specific subset of things. It's always, where is that biggest area of opportunity for us as healthcare providers, because we have to look at a patient, we have to examine a patient, and it's our job. It's why we get paid. It's why we eat. It's, why we have letters after our name, is to find out where we can get you the biggest bang for your buck. And in the situations where your biggest bang for the buck is coming in and getting adhesion removed, then that's a home run for us. There are there are times when, your biggest bang for your buck may not be getting adhesion removed. There may be opportunities where losing 20 pounds is going to provide you with just as much pain relief as improving your knee's ability to flex by 30%. Right? There's going to be times when you're degenerated and you have arthritis, and we want to manage the load, right? There's times when we have to say, hey, back squats and you probably should develop a little bit healthier relationship. There are times, although, extremely rare, where the biggest area of opportunity is the space between your ears. There's very real incidences where your pain is, while not 100% psychological, it is psychological in nature enough to where you probably ought to focus on that and get it taken care of. So, there's four spots. There's the structural, which is arthritides, which is joint changes, tears, things like that. There's functional, which is length or strength. So, can we improve your length? Can we improve your strength? There's metabolic, which is, any sort of metabolic issue, from hyperlipidemia to being overweight to sleeping poorly to overtraining to you name it. And then there's the psychological, and I go a little bit deeper in that. I go psychological, spiritual, emotional. And I've got like a whole list of things that I'll go into that we can talk about on a different podcast. But those are your four areas of opportunity pretty generally.
Yeah, and we're really lucky. We've got the FastMap software through integrative diagnosis, and we can take all this information that we have when getting presented with a patient case, and you can actually play it through that and get some information to come back and actually give some guidance around where this presentation might fit within those 4 buckets, because that's super important to know before you then progress further into that patient management. You know, if there's often going to be a structural and functional component, and most of the time for us that's going to be the predominant issue in there. But if there's a strong metabolic or psychological overlay in that presentation, then you know that's going to be super important, because that's going to have a huge effect on healing capacity and how that's going to play out. So it's you know, consideration for all of these things is so important.
Yeah, and you know, if you can get an accurate depiction of what's going on, if you know that shoulder pain is 30% structural, 40% functional, and 30% psychosocial, I can sit there and say, okay, as the expert in changing functional loads, you can expect through just seeing me a 40% reduction in your symptoms, or 40% improvement in capacity, whatever you want to say. And I can look you in the face and say that.
Yeah.
And I can say, this is how long I think it's going to take. This is how much money I think it's going to be. Are you interested? And if they're interested, then we move on. If they're not, then, you know, they know that they're leaving 40% improvement on the table, right? They can never screw a light bulb in for the rest of their life, never go overhead, not pick up their children. And, you know, there's still going to be, you know, you're only going to solve that structural issue. You can go see a psychologist. You can go do ayahuasca, you can do a magic mushroom ceremony, all that other stuff. And if you fix the psychosomatic thing, then yeah, you still got, you know, 70% to go. So that information is invaluable for the practitioner and for the patient. And just kind of managing expectations and communication, it's so crucial.
Yeah, I think it's you know, I think it's important, because I really like the numbers, and I think having a really simple representation of those things, and even if it's just some numbers on a whiteboard, or it's a bar chart, or it's something like that, it just makes it more tangible. And so you can present that to someone, and you can explain that to them. And, you know, I think it just takes away that element of people being felt like they're getting sold snake oil, you know, because there's some data to go with that. And so that confidence that you're talking about projecting in terms of what you're offering, you know, that becomes much more genuine, I think. So it's great.
Yeah, and whether you're a data person or not, because there are people who are obsessed with data, there are people who are not obsessed with data, there are people who are like, yeah, whatever. Having that data is so influential, right? I mean, you look at that as a patient, and, you know, the reason that we can provide this data is because it's very well backed up, right? We have data that backs up the data, that backs up the data, that backs up the data. So you look at that and you go, oh, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about. And it's for real, because we do.
Yeah, and you know, it's going to end up being a good representation of the load, and that person's going to know what their capacity is as well, because everyone has a different level of capacity, and they're going to know it probably more intimately than we will, even after having gone through a history and everything. But you know, most people, I think, innately know that if they haven't been sleeping well for the last 6 months, for whatever reason it is, and they're going to know that pretty well, and we'll often flush that out in a history or something, but that's going to be very clear already to that person that's having gone through that. And so, you know, once that gets highlighted and stands out, it's definitely something that they're going to resonate with. And yeah, you know, I think just being able to show that in a simple way, and kind of show that potentially you're in this situation now because, you know, this has exceeded this, and it just makes a lot of sense. And I think as a patient, if I had been able to have that available to me when I needed it further down the track, I really would have appreciated that.
Yeah, and what other healthcare field doesn't have data to back it up, right? Like, okay, you have, I guess we'll go back and we'll use urinary tract infection again.
Yeah.
And there is data there. There is
Mm-hmm.
white blood cells in your urine, and we know the exact amount. And based on this exact amount and your history and your gender and all this other thing, we know exactly what we need to prescribe in order to flush that out. It's musculoskeletal healthcare has a bad reputation for a lot of good reasons, and most of those good reasons are based on the fact that the treatment is not based on facts. There is no measurable change. Nobody measures anything. There is no tangible signs of progress. There, are very few individuals that are, respecting these first principles. So everybody else respects him. We should be too, and we are.
Yeah, I think it it comes back to that set of first principles, and at least in my experience, at times I think depending on where you go to get help, sometimes it does skip those first set of principles, and you kind of drive through straight to treatment a lot of the time, and that just depends on what that practitioner, what their skill set is, and what they like to do, potentially what they generally treat. And when we go through this list, treatment is actually the second last principle on the list. So there's a lot that has to happen before you get to it. And I think that front-loaded part that we have to go through is really the more important part, because if you don't get that right, then the treatment doesn't matter. I sort of think about it a little bit like maybe a builder. And his favorite tool to use is a hammer. He's going to get some jobs every now and then that's going to work for him based on what he gets presented with and what that job entails. And he's going to pull his hammer out, and he's going to sometimes get that job done. Sometimes he might get lucky and get a home run and do a really good job. But then he's going to get some more complex jobs sometimes, or he's going to get something that doesn't need a hammer. It needs something much more gentle, or it needs something just completely different, and he's just not going to be able to fulfill that task. He's not going to be able to help there. And that's, I guess, because he's gone straight in with the thing that he likes to do, and he's only got that one tool. But if he actually went right back to the start and really looked at what's actually getting presented to him and what the needs are, and then eventually ended up at a place where he selected the right tool for the job, then and that makes sense. If you say that to anyone in any field, that makes sense. And so I think the fact that it doesn't necessarily always apply in musculoskeletal healthcare is just crazy. So thankfully, we've got a roadmap to get there.
Yeah, and we don't always have the tools either. I'm not going to sit here and say I've fixed every single person. I'm not going to sit here and say I haven't looked at somebody and said, maybe we'll give this a whirl and what we're able to fix them. But it's understanding who applies to your skill set and who may not, right? I mean, I think you and I have very wide skill sets, with a few pretty tall peaks in there, if that makes sense. Like, we've got a couple really, really good tools in our toolbox. We have an understanding of what's not in our wheelhouse, what is in our wheelhouse. And because we have such a great self-awareness of what is and what isn't, we have no real issue with saying, I'm not the guy for you. And people say, well, that's not a very good business tactic. And, first of all, don't care. Second of all, it is a really good business tactic, because those individuals are the first ones that refer people back to you, right? You see somebody after 3 visits and you're like, this ain't me, that person's either coming back to you when their knee or their elbow hurts, or, you know, their mom's coming to you, or their wife's coming to you, or their kid's coming to you. Because once you're self-aware enough to know your strengths and your weaknesses, then I just lost my train of thought. But essentially, once you know what you're good at and what you're not good at, people will refer people to you that they know you'll be good with. You know,
yeah, I think so. Look, I think it's about transparency as well,
right.
And having followed this process and sticking, you know, by these principles. I think you can't really end up anywhere else but there. And so you're right. Hopefully, the majority of cases that come through the office are going to be suited to that environment because of that process. But you know, there might be some there that it's not their best place, and that might uncover itself later. But I think if you have followed this process, then that's already flagged itself to you pretty early on. So there's already that awareness there. And so if the transparency is there as well, the conversation is right, then you know, I think everyone's going to be happy in that process. And you're definitely right. I've experienced that before, where calling something out early and saying, hey, look, I don't think this is for me, but I can help you hopefully get to the place where you need to go. And, you know, that money's not coming through directly, but I think it does come back later. And that's the sort of reputation that I would rather have in the community, rather than, you know, someone that's just trying to make an extra $100.
Yeah. People like to trust people that are right a lot. Like, straight up, if you're right, even if you're not able to help them, you've earned people's trust. And, you know, going back to the different things within the load versus capacity, you know, I've had the person who's come in and is in 9 out of 10 pain, and I go and I measure their range of motion and it's like 95% full. I go and I plug their things into FastMap. I go and I take the history. Well, I've taken the history before that. You know, we find out that you're hypothyroid, something like that, right? I'm able to say, listen, this is a 10% thing for me. I will work my ass off to get you a 10% improvement. If we get more than a 10% improvement, beautiful. I cannot promise you more than a 10% improvement. And I think that's going to take 3 visits. That person understands what they're in for. That person understands that the other 90% is due to a metabolic disorder. And this individual she was portraying a lot of nerve entrapment signs. And it was like, she was so puffy and retaining so much water due to her thyroid condition that things were getting stuck in places that they shouldn't have been getting stuck. And I said, well, you know, there's probably 10% adhesion that I can take care of. And to get your pain to go down from a 9 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10, is that worth $100 to you? Is it worth $200 to you? What's that worth to you?
Yeah.
And then you have that conversation, and, you know, that person comes in, or used to come in and see me every, you know, 4 weeks, because I knew that without getting rid of the fluid, the chances of the adhesion then rebuilding at a rate that is faster than a normal patient would happen, right? So you're going to get this fluid that's causing more pressure, that's causing less oxygen flow, yada, yada, yada. All of a sudden we have adhesion. And she was like, yeah, whatever, sign me up. Once a month for 12 months. Boom. And that's it.
And look, I think that's pretty high level doctoring, really. I mean, that sounds like it's pretty complete. I mean, who knows what else that lady could have been subjected to.
She's got to go back to her endocrinologist and say something is freaking going on here. And she did. And, you know, unfortunately, when we were really starting to get answers and medication adjustments and things like that was when the virus hit, and that was it. But there's examples of that all over the place. There's people with torn hip labrums, and I say, the labrum's accounting probably for 30% of this. The other 70% is adhesion. Are you willing to see this out for a 70% reduction in your symptoms? If we find that after 70% reduction in your symptoms happens, you are still unable to perform your needs and your wants on a day-to-day basis. That's when your ass goes in for surgery. That's when we get things, because you can tell when somebody has a torn lip. Like it's not rocket science. Once you have a baseline level of skills, you understand painful arc, you understand, why is this person's range of motion better than their symptoms? You find that kind of uneven relationship, and you go, yeah, I'm like 99% certain you have a torn labrum. You can be 99% certain without imaging, 1,000%. Same thing happens with shoulders. All this, hey, you probably got a rotator cuff tear, but that doesn't undervalue the fact that you also have adhesion in your rotator cuff that I can take care of, that I can get you a reduction in symptoms, 30%, 40%. That's it. So that's the kind of advanced level diagnosis that you can do with an exam, with a history, with understanding these basic principles. Hey, maybe somebody's got 10 out of 10 pain and they've got a 10% reduction in their function. You're like, that's a little off. And I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting to other principles, but
yeah,
I'm excited.
No, you're 100% right. I think that's the level of detail in the examination is in some ways it's quite basic and quite simple, because we're looking at some pretty basic levels of function in these areas, but the level of detail that goes down to when you're really paying attention to it, it tells the whole story. Well, it tells a big part of the story, and it's great. It's I think it's clearly what's missing in some other settings, because the number of times that back in my CrossFit days, and the CrossFit gym is a wonderful thing for musculoskeletal healthcare providers. I think it's probably paid a lot of bills for people, but that was partly my fault, because I was my load versus capacity was completely out of whack, and I was overtraining myself, and I was under recovering, and I was constantly just walking through problem after problem. But that level of detail in terms of what you just described, for someone to explain that and actually give a little bit of a plan moving forward to deal with that, that's what was needed. And that would have been partly to bring the load down in terms of what I was doing to myself, as well as increasing the capacity in the manual therapy that you're describing there. So, that would have all become evident having gone through that process and understanding load versus capacity at that level. So, I wish I'd known about this earlier, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and for individuals that are hard trainers, people who are under recovering overtraining, right? You can't understate the importance enough of that spiritual, psychological, emotional health, because, I'm not saying everybody that overworks themselves has some sort of spiritual, I don't want to call it a deficiency, but it's the best way to put it, right? Some sort of spiritual qualm. And it's like, what are you running from? What psychological load are you covering up with the gym? So, right, You're covering up a psychological load, and in doing so, you're causing a greater metabolic load, a functional load, and a structural load. So, for instance, I had an individual that, she tore her labrum. I think we talked about this last week. Tore her labrum, had maybe 20% functional thing. The rest was all labrum. And I said, listen, you've got to calm down a bit on the squatting, on the training, on the working out. You can't do it anymore. You've literally retorn your labrum on a surgically repaired labrum, which is ridiculously hard to do, right? I mean, statistically speaking, it's borderline impossible. And I had to have a conversation with the orthopedic surgeon about this too. He's like, that happens 1 in 10,000 times. And I'm like, well, I've got lucky number 10,000 here. I'm like, you've got to stop. You've got to stop squatting. You got to replace your squatting with lunging. You've got to do this, that, this, that, this. Here's how we laid out to you. She couldn't. I said, what's going on? Why can't you slow down? Why can't you stop working out? too much. And, you know, you get this kind of moment of stillness with the patient and yourself. And she's like, I'm afraid that, you know, I'm going to get fat. I'm going to put on weight. And I'm like, bingo, bango, bongo. Like, that's not my problem to solve, but that's your problem now. You know what I mean? That's your biggest issue. And if you're ignoring that part of the load versus capacity equation, then you're just like, yeah, I don't know. Well, maybe go get surgery again, or maybe do this again, or maybe I'm not good at removing adhesion enough. Maybe my ability to modulate your load isn't great. What's going on? There's a piece missing, and when the piece missing is a huge psychological issue, then you've got to be able to find it. You've got to be able to find that dysfunctional load, no matter what it is. So that's a huge thing that I run into with overtraining. It's like, just stop. You have to stop. What are you running from? And if you can get them to understand that and be like, you know, maybe this is an appropriate job for a behavioral therapist, or hey, I got this guy that does plant ceremonies or whatever the heck you want to call it. And you got to kind of find out while your self-worth's tied up into your ability to just perform output after output after output in the gym.
Yeah, it could be a really hard thing to break away from, depending on where your attention has been. You know, I think probably where I physically probably looked at my fittest and strongest and most shredded, I was probably almost the most unhealthy in terms of what was going on, you know, in my body. I think probably systemically I was reasonably healthy. My cardiovascular health was off the charts and my lungs were good, but you know, what was going on in my spine and everywhere else in the soft tissues was just a nightmare. And you know, so I think to try and get to that, for me, it wasn't sustainable for sure, to try and maintain that. And I think the line in terms of where we probably need to be, in terms of longevity, is a lot further back than most of us thought it was, and probably that we ever really wanted to really accept. And after having sort of gone through that fire a little bit over a few years, I've really kind of realized that, you know, less is more a lot of the time. And, you know, I think I'm really realizing that now, especially while we're in this lockdown, because, you know, less is less. That's just what it is. We don't have access.
It's mandatory.
Right. We don't have access to be able to do a lot more than that. And that's okay. You know, you sort of, and it is a bit of a psychological battle sometimes, because you're doing a lot less than you used to, and so you're sort of going, oh my god, like it's Easter and I'm gonna eat a shitload of chocolate this weekend, and I'm gonna wake up and what am I gonna look like? Am I gonna be fat tomorrow? Or, you know, like it's
like, no, I'm gonna do 1,000 push-ups on Sunday night.
Right. I'm gonna burn that off. Yeah. But these
you can't lift your arms up. Then you've got bicep tendonitis bilaterally, and you're like, oh man, my shoulders, they're weak. I don't know what's happening. Let me look up YouTube videos on how to stretch my shoulders. It's like, no, you ate the chocolate to cover something up, and then you felt like shit. So you tried to cover up that feeling of shit with push-ups, and you got biceps tendonitis. So why do you feel like shit when you eat chocolate? Why do you feel like you got to eat chocolate? That's your biggest area of opportunity. Get the fuck off YouTube and just be a normal person.
Yeah, and these are the conversations that, it's 100% right. This is the conversations that people have in their heads. I mean, you know, I've had those conversations with myself that many times, and I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of getting older and a little bit wiser, and just kind of accepting that that some of these things that we held to be, you know, really important things in life are not so important anymore. And it's, you know, it's got to focus on longevity. And I think having that load versus capacity idea in the back of your mind, with that sort of that seesaw, that teeter-totter, you know, that can really drive a lot of these decisions, because once you understand that you need to make a decision on something, am I going to do this? Is it a good idea? I'm feeling a bit sore today. I'm feeling a bit crappy, but I'm going to go and push myself to do a workout, because if I don't do that, I'm a pussy. You know,
I'm a piece of shit. I'm fat. I'm going to lose my six pack. My girlfriend won't want to yeehaw tonight.
Exactly. And so when you start having those thoughts, I think it just gives you something to stand behind a little bit and go, look, I can make a better decision today, and maybe I'll hit that up tomorrow or something. So, yeah, you know, you can extrapolate this concept out anywhere, and I think it really helps decision making on a lot of levels.
It's a principle. It is universally true. That's the definition. That's it. We hold these truths to be universal, whatever the heck it says in the Declaration of Independence in the States. Sorry.
Let me grab this. I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay.
So this was from the wall as you walk into ID headquarters in Boston. And I don't know if it might be like a chalkboard or something, and they've put it on there.
Yeah, it's like a painted on chalkboard. Right.
So it just sort of highlights these principles, and these aren't necessarily in the order that we go through them. But if we read through in an order, we've got load versus capacity at the top of the list. So this is the first thing that we consider. And then respecting pathology. So we want to have an understanding of what's actually the truth, what's actually the pathology that's happening in this person. Respecting the symptoms. So the symptoms are telling us a really important story, and it's almost like a code that we need to decipher to get closer to understanding what's going on. Measuring everything, man, this was like, I think one of the things that really stood out about this way of approaching things, and being able to actually objectively measure range of motion and have numbers around that to observe and to track. Man, game changer, huge. The diagnosis, you know, how many times have you heard of someone that's come in and they've been through the ringer and they've had treatment and everything, and you ask them, well, what was the diagnosis that you were given? And they don't have anything to tell you, or it's something that just doesn't really make sense. So having that to be accurate and specific to that person is so important. And then the second last thing that we get to is treatment on this list. And look, how important is the treatment? It's kind of where we get to have fun, I suppose, as providers. It's what we work on with our skills, but you know, it's the second last thing on the list. So it just highlights the order of hierarchy here and how much work has to be done and done properly before you get there. And you know, that, I think that speaks volumes, right?
Absolutely.
And then the last one being communication, and being able to actually communicate all of this back and actually work with someone to understand all of this and buy into this, and actually, you know, the load versus capacity, to be able to understand that and communicate that effectively, then everything sort of ties together. So I think that's a really nice representation of all of this stuff. It just sort of ties in, and it puts it all in a nice little hierarchy to sort of understand where these all fit together. So there you go.
I think it's beautiful. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
can you hear me?
It's come back. Yeah, we're good.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's my internet connection is unstable. I think that's a beautiful place to wrap it up. I got a meeting in a minute.
Nicely done. All right. We'll see you soon, man. Be well.
Next week. What's next week? Give me the preview.
We got respecting pathology next week. So
that's my favorite one.
We're going to get into some stuff. We're going to, this is a huge part of the process of understanding what's happening in someone, because these things are facts that we need to uncover, and it's not something that we're trying to believe in. It's not something we're asking someone to have some faith in.
It's not philosophical.
There you go.
Factual.
That's it. So yeah, we're going to get into that next week. It should be fun.
All right, brother.
All right, buddy.
Have a good one.
See you soon.
Chat
Take
soon.
care. Bye.
Bye.